Good day to you. We're now entering the Holy Week through the celebration of Palm Sunday. The most solemn days of our faith is coming, and we prepare again for a more intimate encounter with the Lord as we celebrate the liturgical prayers and liturgical services of this season, and as we spend also some personal times for prayer to be with the Lord. And so as I continue to help Father Vic Baltasar in going through the questions asked by Jesus, assigned to me is this question raised by the Lord during His resurrection, accompanying of two disciples going back to Emmaus, their hometown. Again, the Lord is posing a question to them that all the more brings home that point we have been saying, that the Lord, in asking questions, would not want to stop the conversation, but the Lord would want to join us in conversing and living out the question of ourselves and living out the question of holding on to faith. Our Lord invites us to be with Him as He Himself has gone through the most holy days of this coming Holy Week, as He has gone through His passion, death, and resurrection.
Ilikha mo kami ng sangbagong puso, hugasan ang kamay na basa ng dugo, linisin ng diwan sa halay ay puno. Ilikha mo kami ng sangbagong puso, itindig mo kami, kaming iyong bansa. Akayin sa landas patungo sa kapwa, ihatid sa piging na iyong inihanda. Itindig mo kami, kaming iyong bansa. Amang Diyos, iyong baguhin ang tao't daigdig sa banal na takot, sambang nanginginig. Ibalik ang puso't bayang nanlalamig, likhain mong muli kami pag-ibig.
And so we begin by proclaiming the Gospel. As I've mentioned, this is recorded in the Gospel according to St. Luke on the 24th chapter. Now that very day, two of the disciples were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus, and they were conversing about all the things that had occurred. And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus Himself drew near and walked with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing Him. Jesus asked, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" The disciples stopped, looking downcast. One of them, Cleopas, said to Him in reply, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know of the things that have taken place there in these days?" And Jesus replied, "What sort of things?" They said to Him, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. Our chief priests and rulers both handed Him over to a sentence of death and crucified Him. But we were hoping that He would be the one to redeem Israel. And besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since this took place. Some women from our group have astounded us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find His body. They came back and reported that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who announced that He was alive. Then some of those with us went to the tomb and found things just as the women had described, but him they did not see. And Jesus said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer and enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures. As they approached the village to which they were going, he gave the impression that he was going on further, but they urged him, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. And it happened that while he was with them at table, he took bread, said a blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. With that, their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he vanished from their sight. Then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us?" So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with them, who were saying, "The Lord has truly risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. I would like to suggest 3 points for our reflection and our approach to the question posed by Jesus. The first is Jesus himself drew near and walked with them. The second is their eyes were prevented from seeing him. And the third, that the question Jesus posed, "What were you discussing along the way?" The first point is the approach of the risen Lord. If one contemplates this gospel, it started off with the confusion, desperation, and brokenheartedness of Cleophas and his companion. They were, by the way, returning home to Emmaus. They were sneaking out of Jerusalem and going home. Going back to a former life, or the trip to return home, is an abandonment of the life of discipleship. Going back to a former life usually portrays in the gospel the response of those who are unable to go beyond a crisis. For example, in the Gospel of St. John, after Jesus himself proclaiming that he is the bread of life given so that life may be in us, many of his followers simply said, "This is difficult to accept." And later, on the 66th verse of that chapter, John 6, it was said that because of this, many disciples returned to their former way of life and no longer accompanied him. This is somewhat akin to Peter's declaration on the 21st chapter of the Gospel of St. John. Peter declares, "I am going fishing," and his companions responded with, "We also will come with you." This is, again, a return to the former life and can be interpreted as an abandonment of discipleship. So whenever there's a crisis, even if the Lord presents himself as bread of life, he who is life for us, or at that point in the Gospel according to St. Luke, as he who is risen from the dead, life after death, the disciples in their brokenheartedness and hard-headedness simply call it quits and go back home. Again, in the Gospel of St. John, even after seeing the empty tomb and hearing the witness of Mary Magdalene, Peter and his companion is said to go back home. They returned home in John 20 verse 10, even after seeing the empty tomb and hearing the proclamation of Mary Magdalene. The gospel is quick to explain they have not yet understood the scriptures that pertains to Jesus. Going back then to the disciples on their way to Emmaus, their brokenheartedness is expressed in the words, "We were hoping he's the one to redeem Israel." And their panic and inability to understand, some women from our group have astounded us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. These followers of Jesus are demonstrating for us the same crisis that happened to Peter and his companion, who, although are witnesses of the empty tomb and hearers of the proclamation of Mary Magdalene, are so confused and they simply went back home. The two disciples of Emmaus were followers of the Lord for 3 years, anticipating the liberation of their home country. Back then, they were occupied by the Romans. They were part of the Roman Empire, and foreigners, or those who are Gentiles, are running their country for them. They followed Jesus for that 3 years, and every time the Lord performs great and mighty works, all the more their hope was inflamed, but they saw the terror of Good Friday. The death of their leader broke them. Even news of his rising is not enough to pick up the pieces of their broken selves. It was not enough to know about Jesus. It was not enough to know his power, his might in performing miracles during his lifetime. It was not enough to hear his stories of his rising from the dead. It was not enough to see the empty tomb. The cross of Good Friday has so wounded their spirits, numbed their minds, and broken their hearts. I wonder how many of us will go through the Holy Week and even embrace Easter with the same spirit. I wonder how many of us with minds, hearts, and spirit that are broken as the church celebrates the Easter joy. But this is precisely the good news of the walk to Emmaus. Jesus approaches and walks along the way with us in this situation. With our minds numbed, with our spirits wounded, with our heart broken. Even in this pit of darkness, perhaps, utter confusion, even in this sense of without direction, the approach of the mystery of the Holy Week will happen, and the grace of the holy days will be given. The Lord chooses to be with us even in the confusion of our minds, the lowness of our spirits, and with hearts shattered within us. Perhaps it's good to remember that the Lord chooses even the lowest point of our lives to surprise us, that even then, He is God for us. Even during such experiences, He remains to be Emmanuel for us. I remember this theologian who is the teacher of Karl Rahner and Hans Urs von Balthasar. His name is Eric Sivara, and he's known to have said, I usually hear St. Ignatius. Eric Sivara was a Jesuit, and he says, St. Ignatius always says, Deus semper maior, God is always great. That is true, that God is always great. If you try to be good, then God cannot be outdone in being good towards it. All the more He will shower you with goodness. If you are loving and understanding, the Lord cannot be unmatched. The Lord cannot be outdone in showing His love and compassion also, and understanding towards us. The Lord is always great. As St. Ignatius says, according to Eric Sivara, who has lived some centuries after St. Ignatius, he says, although I find the teaching of St. Ignatius true in some instances, but he said, in my life, because Eric Sivara has gone through 2 nervous breakdowns, and at some point, an ex-Jesuit, Hans Urs von Balthasar, was the one taking care of them, because more or less many of his companions, I think, have given up on him also. And Eric Sivara says, Deus semper maior. St. Ignatius is true in proclaiming that. But in my life, he said, I learned God is also always small. It is not only that God is always great, but also God is always small. Deus semper tenor. Meaning, at the lowest point of our life, God also surprises us that He can be found even at the most wretched situation of our existence. Will be surprised, because it is precisely because of that wretchedness that God surprises us with His companionship, with His walking along with us. And so as we enter fully into the Holy Week, we embrace our realities. We call to mind and call to our hearts the darkness that may be accompanying us, and open ourselves up to that surprise that even then the Lord would shine in His companionship. The Lord will surprise us in His presence, by His presence. I remember Joanne Chittister writing about the recitation of the Credo on the Sunday right after the burial of her mother. She said the words of the Creed to special meaning and intensity for her. She said, I had to believe in the resurrection of the dead. I believe Joanne Chittister is not saying that here faith depends on her will or the strength of her initiative. I hear Joanne saying that here, somehow she's echoing that line in Mark 9:24. I believe, help my unbelief, because there is receptivity in the very heart of faith. There is only openness in coming to believe in the love that God has for us. As it is on the road to Emmaus, in their desperation and confusion, it was the resurrected Jesus who first took the initiative and walked with them. The gift of the first move coming from God, the gift of a love that is fading there, the gift of Jesus dying on the cross for us while we were sinners, the gift of light being proclaimed amidst darkness. And because it was the Word of God, it happened. It was creating. And Jesus, the Word made flesh, approached us, that Isaiah says, a people in darkness now has light. I'd like to transition now to the second point they would want to reflect on. Their eyes were prevented from recognizing Jesus. The second point allows us to take some moments and go through our blocks and resistances that move us away from meeting the Lord of the Holy Week. It's good to take stock and also recognize what's keeping us from approaching Jesus much more fully, or being open to Jesus in these holiest of days of the year. What will keep us from celebrating Palm Sunday or the joy of Easter? What would withhold our immersion into the mystery of Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Yak Saturday? Maybe it's good to look into our resistances. What was I expecting of the Easter joy? And how do I understand it as different from fleeting feelings of happiness? Sometimes people have difficulty celebrating because they have a sense of celebration as connected with this experience of gladness or happiness, or moments of success or victory. But it's good to experience the Holy Week as an entirety in itself. The Lord never skipped Good Friday and directly went to Easter Sunday. It's a full reality of Maundy Thursday, the giving of the mandate, love as I have loved you, and Good Friday, the giving of the self totally, even up to the point of death. And then that Saturday, the total silence of the tomb, ringing, hanging on between heaven and earth, surrendering to the Father and Creator of all. And only after that we get to Easter Sunday. It's good to allow ourselves entry into this fuller sensing of the mystery of the Holy Week, or the mystery of the Easter Triduum. The disciples of Emmaus were unable to recognize the risen Christ. The Gospel says they were not yet ready because they have not yet understood the scriptures that pertain to Jesus. And so the Lord gave time to explain the scriptures coming from Moses through the prophets and relating with them until the breaking of the bread, that fully He was manifested to them. It's good to see that even in their utter confusion, even in their blindness, even in their ignorance of the scriptures that pertains to Jesus, the Lord did not give up on them, but precisely as we have said in the first point, He walked along with them, He taught them patiently, He explained the gospel to them, and much more important perhaps, He was present to them along the way. So if we go back to our blocks and resistances towards the Lord, if we purify our sense of Easter joy and differentiate it from fleeting happiness, if we embrace fully the message of the Easter Triduum, that Jesus accompanies us, or Jesus goes through all these days of Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for our benefit, that Jesus undergoes the mystery of these days, we are invited to receive. We are invited to wonder at this reality that even amidst our resistances and blocks, it does not matter for the Lord, meaning He nonetheless gives us instruction. He nonetheless is present to us. He nonetheless shares with us graces that would be helpful for us. In the Gospel according to St. John, there's this scene when St. Jude Thaddeus, one of the apostles of the Lord, asked Jesus, how come you are manifesting yourself to us, showing yourself to us, and not to the whole world, not to everybody else? And to that, the Lord responded to him, if you love me, you will obey my commandment. It's surprising how is that a response to the question of St. Jude Thaddeus. But the Lord suddenly talked about love. Maybe that's key to experiencing the fullness of the mysteries of Holy Week. Like all of this, the mystery of sharing the meal, the mystery of self-surrender in the cross, the mystery of the silence of the tomb and burial and the stay in the tomb of Black Saturday, and even the mystery of the rising. Maybe all of this is understood as a manifestation of love being given for us. And once that love is accepted, it is then that we're able to comprehend who Jesus is for us and the things that He has done for us. And the blocks and resistances were not pulled down by Jesus. The blocks and resistances that may have been helpful in, even bringing us to where we are right now, they were not broken down by the Lord, but the Lord was able to approach us as He approached the disciples of Emmaus. And even with those blocks, even with those resistances, He was patiently proclaiming the scriptures to them, explaining about Himself, and even sharing a meal with them, and stayed and showered His presence towards them. And when that sacrament of love, that is the Eucharist, the breaking of the bread, when that was being shared between Jesus and the disciples of Emmaus, it was then that their eyes were open. Our hearts were burning when the Lord was explaining to us. It was that point that their eyes were able to recognize Jesus. They finally understood the entirety of the Holy Week as a manifestation of His love that is able to save, because it is a love that is stronger than sin and death. It will continue to invite further reflections. It will continue to invite more contemplation. It will continue to be a mystery for us, how this God, who is made man out of love, went through His life of 30 years, His preaching of 3 years, and His summit of mission of passion, death, and resurrection, all in the name of love for us. It will continue to be a source of maturity, a source of fidelity for us, living and abiding by that love that comes from God. As we have considered the approach of Jesus even in the midst of our being in darkness, and as we consider also our blocks and resistances towards the Lord, we marvel at this Jesus who nonetheless stays with us in all fidelity, patiently uncovering the mystery of life for us through the scriptures and through His presence, and even sharing meals with them until now in the breaking of the bread. Our last point is the question of the Lord that was posed to the two disciples of Emmaus. The question is, what were we discussing along the way? And this can be calmly treated as Jesus is not closing the conversation, but Jesus is continuing the conversation. So the discussion along the way is about Him, and sometimes in the way we are, and because of our blocks and resistances, we have difficulty listening clearly, and we have difficulty understanding the person of the Lord for us. And yet, in His faithfulness, He says, even in our confusion, even in our infidelity, even in our sinfulness, the Lord remains to be faithful. And His faithfulness is expressed in abiding by us and joining in the conversation. The question, what we've been discussing along the way, does not take away, the pain of Good Friday. It does not erase or mitigate the sighing of people whose hope were broken. It does not shut close the open reality of what can be expressed or what can be talked about. Jesus joins the conversation. He's able to hear the expression of desperation in the voice of His disciples. He was able to join them and be present with them as they express their confusion. He was able to deal with that in the brokenness of their hearts and the woundedness of their spirits. And there's a mystery also in that. Sometimes there's this deep mystery of the Lord being with us and allowing us to go through difficult moments in the company of His presence, in the company of His love. That might sound difficult at first, and yet many saints and many followers of the Lord were able to identify that a life that is lived really faithful to the steps that were left or walked on by Jesus will always lead us to a confrontation sometimes with the dark alleys of life, or a life that somehow exerts effort in really being faithful towards Jesus would eventually be marked by the shadow of the cross or the carrying of the cross. Even our ordinary life as human beings, the cycle of being born, growing up, and then transitioning in the middle years of our life, and then passing on our learnings to the next generation. Some moments of fruitfulness will eventually also lead to sickness settling in, weakness of the body being true, and later on, even a confrontation with death. As I mentioned before, Joan Chittister, it does not necessarily mean our own mortality at first, but sometimes people close to us, people who matter to us, people who are dear to us, their passing on could really break our hearts and bring us close to desperation or surrender. I'd like to close with that quotation or consideration given by a German Protestant writer and pastor. He said, "There's nothing that can replace the absence of someone dear to us, and one should not even attempt to do so. One must simply hold out and endure. At first, that sounds very hard, but at the same time, it is also great comfort. For to the extent the emptiness truly remains unfilled, one remains connected to the person through it. It is wrong to say that God fills the emptiness. God in no way fills it, but much more leaves it precisely unfilled, and thus helps us preserve, even in pain, the authentic relationship. Furthermore, the more beautiful and full the remembrances, the more difficult the separation. But gratitude transforms the torment of memory into silent joy. One bears what was lovely in the past, not as a thorn, but as a precious gift deep within it, a hidden treasure of which one can always be certain." When people close to me passed on in 2017, I found this quotation by Bonhoeffer very, very consoling. Our Lord, of course, in His resurrection has been victorious against sin and death. And yet the reality of accepting death of a loved one, it's like hearing the message of Easter, and yet because of that brokenheartedness brought about by the passing on of a loved one, it's still difficult to just simply say that because Jesus has risen from the dead, we have no cause for grieving. No, the grieving will remain to be true. The grieving will remain to be needed. As Bonhoeffer has said, sometimes the Lord does not fill up that wound that is caused by the separation, but even sustains it, but keeps it there, because even amidst the pain, the connection may remain. And the Lord accompanies us, especially during such moments. The Lord has risen, especially abides by us during such moments. And the Lord who Himself has gone through death was not exempting from this reality of dying and being buried. Even in grieving, there's this point when you will just have to accept the reality of people dying, and you will just have to accept that whatever you do, you cannot understand what has happened, that even amidst the pain, sometimes even anger and burden, we'll just have to surrender to a reality that is greater than ourselves. And that is the essence of the Lord asking us, what are you conversing along the way? What are you talking about along the way? Please stop using the pain of being human abides by us and goes through it and accompanies us, even at the cost of paying for himself, even at the cost of his dying on the cross, even at the point of being buried himself, precisely because he would want to accompany us and sustain that connection between us and the loved ones who have gone before us. And it is easy to simply run to recognizing God as, just filling up the questions and shutting down all conversations, but is simply blindly leaping to Him being the answer. But in reality, if He opens the question, He does not end the conversation, but joins us precisely, sustains it, allows it to continue. And sometimes even if pain and suffering are included, they are nonetheless included in that story of love that is stronger than the story of our surrender through faith in His majesty, in His life that will always be beyond our abilities and our strength. That hanging on time of Black Saturday, it's really good to consider this, how faith is not blind to us, to the reality of our mortality or our needs for God. Faith is precisely in the midst of all this. The Lord has acted first to express His love, and the Lord has accompanied us and has shown us that even at that point of holding on to the love of the Father until then, we will go through darkness, but the fidelity of the Father and the fidelity of the Son interacting in that openness that invites us to joy. So as we end the retreat for daily life, it does not happen that automatically we'll be able to close with the resurrection or will end with the consolation of the rising from the dead. It's different. The movement, the rhythm of our receiving the grace of the Easter joy. And it might be a different shape for us. It might be a surprise for us. It might be lighthearted for us. It might be different from what we expect. But we respect our rhythms and our being with them, and we close our retreat by focusing more on where the Lord is accompanying us and not immediately, running ahead of the process or cutting short the things we still have to experience with the love of the Lord or with the shepherding of Jesus, so that it is not just an immediate shortcut to an ending, but sometimes even after the 30-day for some and repentance, they get to be surprised that the Easter joy or the message of the Easter comes to them after 10 or 15 or 20 years. and this is not to alarm you, I hope, but the mystery continues even after the ending of the retreat in daily life. And the conversation with Jesus will continue, and sometimes better still, the Lord will abide by us even as we confront the reality of our own passing and the living out the Paschal mystery in our life.
Tuwing dakong dapit hapon, minamasdan kong lagi ang paglubog ng araw, hudyat ng takip silim. Kanya ng aking buhay, kung may dilim ang buwan, hihiwat sa baybayin sa pagsapit ng dilim. ko lamang ang hangin ay mapigil at ang dilim ng hating gabi huwag sanang magmamali upang ang palakaya ay laging masagana. Sa tangan kong liwanag ang kaway lalapit. Nang dakong dapit hapon, piging ng Panginoon sa mga kaibigan ay maghuling hapunan sa bagong salo-salo. Nagdiriwang ang bayan, ang tanging kanyang hain ay sarili niyang buhay. Nang dakong dapit hapon, piging ng Panginoon sa mga kaibigan ay maghuling hapunan sa bagong salo-salo. Nagdiriwang ang bayan, ang tanging kanyang hain ay sarili niyang buhay.
Thank you for joining us in these days of retreat and days of reflection with the Lord. I hope our points are helpful for your guidance, and the Lord's words and the Lord's presence be truly with you as you experience the holiest and the most sacred of days.